Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. On today's episode of me discussing stuff and things, I'll be going over some final thoughts on Last One Standing Season 2. This was the competition series in which 14 survivalists battled it out for the title of Last One Standing, $100,000, and a perfect 10.0 PSR. And spoiler alert, Dan is the winner. I had made a podcast with my friend Avery, Pop Culture Curiosities. Please check it out. It's on YouTube and on Spotify. And on the Naked and Afraid episode that we did, I talked about how Last One Standing Season 1 wasn't really my favorite, but I enjoyed Waz because of his Australian accent and Dan because he's a marine biologist and I am also a scientist, and I thought that was really cool. And they ended up being the top two of Last One Standing Season 1 and the first two winners of Last One Standing, so good for me. I also made some predictions for the season. Some of my elimination order was correct, but my predictions about there being a new survivalist brought in at some point was wrong. And a big twist, other than the two people being eliminated day one, was also wrong. But my elimination order was good, except for Trish went later than I thought she did. Booland went earlier than I thought he did. And Gary went later than I thought he did. But my final five prediction was good, and some of my early and middle outs were good. So what can you do? I was going off of the trailer in that case. And maybe we'll see the alternates for Last One Standing Season 2 on Last One Standing Season 3. There has been no confirmation as of September 22nd of there being a renewal, but I don't see why they wouldn't want to continue the series because it has been very polarizing and has a high viewership, at least from what I've heard. So we shall see. And final thoughts. Double elimination day one was a big twist, but hopefully they don't do that moving forward because I'm sure a lot of individuals might be like, I'm not going to be potentially eliminated day one. That's crazy. And unfortunately, Lacey and Russell were the first ones to go home. Lacey battled to the very end, and unfortunately, Russell lost his rope, so there was nothing he could really do at that moment. So it was sad to see them go. Kate self-tapped a few days in due to the cold, and that was upsetting. And again, I'll reiterate, I usually say this in the description, but please do not send hate to the survivalists. Support your favorites. It's not going to help the survivalists in any way if you're going to be saying mean things to them. And just don't be mean, please. Don't be mean to their faces. There can be constructive criticism, but I don't know. I'm not a survivalist, so I'm just going off of placements and who I like based on the edit. There are some survivalists who are better at dealing with the edit than others and are production favorites because they give production what they want in terms of drama and big personality and talking heads that can cause some controversy or some conflict, but that's fine. So yeah, there's a double elimination, Kate taps, and then there is the axe chopping challenge, which Gary, Danny, and Lindsay lose, and Lindsay ends up going home. She had a lot of integrity, and Jeff said he would trade places with her for a bow, and she said no. I think it would be funny / interesting if she was like, okay, I'll trade you my spot in the elimination challenge for a bow, because Jeff wanted to get rid of Danny, and he's like, you know what, I'll just switch with Lindsay because I can beat Danny. And it would be funny if they made that trade, but then at the last minute, production's like, actually, no, you can't do that, Lindsay. You lose a bow. You are in this elimination challenge, and now your teammates do not like you, but that did not happen. But I could totally see that happening if she did try to make that trade. And then, unfortunately, Booland is med tapped from the challenge. He's one of 3 individuals that are med tapped, and it would be great to see Booland come back because it seems after the first challenge, Booland kind of is not himself and is kind of low energy, and he took 3 months to recover in the hospital, so hopefully he can come back and be in a better place physically. And so we shall see what happens, but hopefully he can come back. And then, unfortunately, Darren is mid-tap from the challenge because during the 4-prong spear challenge, he jumped in the pool and hurt himself. Later on, he was doing some running and made the injury worse, and so he had to be mid-tap for the challenge. And so hopefully he can come back too because he did really well in the bushcrafting challenges. He placed pretty high in all the challenges he competed in, and he made some really good axes for the tree chopping challenge. He got first in the 4-prong spear challenge. He did really well in the first elimination challenge, and it was just a crazy accident that sent him home. So hopefully he can come back. And then Trish was good at creating some drama for the season, or creating some tension with Dan throughout the season, because she was saying how, oh, Dan poisoned the meat, Dan did this, Dan doesn't listen to me, Dan does his own thing. And so that was interesting, but all Dan really said was, oh, Trish, I don't really trust her that much. Dan also said he didn't trust Jeff that much either. And so that was interesting. But yeah, Trish's one-sided rivalry was very interesting to watch. And unfortunately, she is eliminated in 8th place because she was unable to rebuild her figure 4 trap. And so she goes home, calls everyone but the winners losers, and so she's out. Next to be med-tapped is Danny, whose storyline is she's a vegetarian, but she is also very skilled, and everyone was worried that she might not be able to make it as far as everyone else because of lack of protein. And there was also the moment where it seemed Danny was kind of egging Gary on and helping him with his mantrum by the lake, because she was saying how, oh, they're looking for weakness in you, Gary. They're looking for weakness. And so Gary was like, you're not appreciative. You're leaving me out of things. And Danny's like, I don't know what's going on. And she did find some Weaver bird eggs, and she did share them with her partners, and she was just hiding them from everyone else. So that was a very interesting editing choice. And there was also the point when she wasn't feeling very well that Gary and Fernando were saying how a vegetarian can't survive where they are just due to lack of protein and the inability to get certain nutrients. And Danny said she feels like an outcast, which is kind of full circle from her XL season 1 moment with all that happened, but I don't want to get into that. Again, don't send hate to the survivalists. Editing, it's all editing. And there was also some drama after she left surrounding whether or not she gave her items to Dan or not. Apparently, Danny wanted to have her items be given to Gary and Fernando, but she did not communicate that with Dan. She just said Dan can keep her stuff, and she didn't want to leave any messages for anyone. And so Jeff and Gary were saying how, oh, Dan just stayed with her to get her stuff. But then if that's where your mind goes, why didn't you do that to get her stuff? But Dan seemed genuinely upset that she left and was genuinely caring for her and helping her out in that moment and emotionally supporting her. But, you know, I want to go with Dan on this, and that he was just making sure she was okay. Gary could have stayed back, but he didn't. Jeff could have stayed back, but he didn't. So, you know, the edits, I don't know. Dan's edit was odd this season because it seemed a lot of people were piling on him, and he was just doing his thing, and a lot of fans were very against him and very team Jeff. And this season mainly focused on Jeff's quote-unquote redemption arc and Gary's personality in general. But, you know, production, editing, I don't know. I think Dan's great. And so Danny is med-tapped from the challenge, sadly, due to lack of protein. She said she got dengue fever, but Victor, who is a medic, was on the show and lives in South Africa, is like, yeah, no, South Africa doesn't have dengue fever, so how did she get it? So who knows? And then we have our top 6. And Jeff, Gary, and Patrick leave. Patrick was the newbie who showed that he should not be underestimated. His PSR jumped from a 7.9 to an 8.9. He got the first major big game hunt of Last One Standing. He got the largest big game hunt. And he also was a part of a few arguments with Gary. He was like, I'm going to be the Legend Slayer. Gary wants to be Tiny Tim at the soup kitchen. And so he had a very interesting strategy. Him and Jeff ended up being buddies, so some of their rivalry was, you know, more playful than anything, although the edit showed Patrick taking it a little too far, but oh well. And so hopefully Patrick can go back and show off some more of his skills. And Gary and Jeff were some of the main characters. Gary had an entire episode named after him where he didn't feel appreciated after all the work he's done. Everyone was saying how Danny was trying to starve him and Fernando out because she wouldn't let them trade the knives. And Gary was yelling at everyone. He thought some of them were being selfish or being ungrateful. And so that's interesting. And Jeff, he changed his strategy for this season. And when he gave out food to people, people were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Jeff gave us food. Wow, he's changed. When usually everyone else was giving out food except for Patrick that one time with the Niala, but he might have given people food later, but I don't know. So, and Jeff was the main character of the penultimate episode because he won the primitive water boiling challenge, was able to take Gary's item, was able to divvy up the groups, and then later got an Impala. And so Jeff was riding high, but unfortunately, he, along with Gary, were unable to make primitive fire again for the second season in a row, and they were both eliminated. So we have our final three: Fernando, Kai, and Dan. Fernando is very humble and played a very humble, nice game. He didn't really ruffle any feathers. He mainly talked about how he's doing this for his family, his 4 kids, his loving wife, minivans. I drive a minivan. What am I doing? And he was a lot better than he gave himself credit for. Kai showed that she is not the token female, her words, and she showed off the skills that she had, and she is one of the most knowledgeable survivalists from the show. Unfortunately, she came up a little bit short, and she was so close to winning, but the fire on her arrow went out, and Dan ends up winning the challenge. And Dan, again, his edit was very interesting. He had a strategy going in, but never outright argued with anyone. He and Trish kind of had an aside talking about Gary's attitude when he was showing them the lake with all the fish and stuff. He and a few others ended up getting into it with Gary, and he's like, do you think that makes me want to give you food? And so he has a great personality. Maybe he wasn't giving production what they wanted in terms of drama. So maybe they're like, oh, look at everyone's talking behind Dan's back. Is he being sneaky? But I don't think Dan was being sneaky. People were just saying he was being sneaky, and people believe them. But what you see isn't always the truth. But what we did see was Dan winning fair and square. And Dan was never really ever close to being eliminated or being last place in reward challenges, because the only time he was ever super in danger of either being eliminated or being last in a reward challenge was during the firing the arrow through the ring challenge, where his team got second, but he was able to get the arrow through the ring after Jeff had a few tries but wasn't successful. And then Patrick, Kai, and Darren were up for elimination instead of Dan's group. And then there was the time with the primitive water boiling challenge where he got 4th out of 6. And I think that was the closest he was ever to being last in a reward challenge. So he was never super in trouble of getting last place. I know Patrick and Jeff got last place during the Arapuca bird trap building challenge. Patrick and Kai were in danger of being eliminated after the firing the arrow through a ring challenge when Darren was med tapped. Gary was in the tripod building challenge with Lindsay and Danny after their team got last in the tree chopping challenge, and Fernando was second to last in the figure 4 trap building challenge. But yeah, Dan did really well throughout the season. He had a really good strategy. He was able to set the pyre on fire and win the challenge, and he wins $100,000, a 10.0 PSR, and the title of Last One Standing. Will we be able to see another season? Hopefully. Will I be making a who do I think is going to be on it? Yes, I will. So we'll see what happens, and those are my final thoughts. Thank you so much for listening. Please comment nice things, like and subscribe, and click the next video if it's mine, please and thank you. I appreciate you all, and have a wonderful day/night. Okay, bye-bye.